Melissa Norris here. You're listening to the Dragging Alaska podcast, where David Bays and I sit down with candidates running for governor, Senate, and House to talk about one issue: trawl fishing in Alaska. It's one of the most talked about topics in this year's elections, and our goal is simple: help Alaskans understand where each candidate stands and what they plan to do about it. We are fortunate today to be joined by Dave Bronson, past Anchorage mayor, now running for Alaska State governor. We share a similar point of view on trawl. So let's leave it to Dave to tell us a little bit about himself and where he stands with trawl.
Well, short bio. I've been in Alaska about 35 years. I came up in 91 with the airlines after serving several years in the military. I had a chance to come up here for 2 years, and I'm on year 35. So I flunked public math. I'm still here. Our kids were born here, raised here. My son's a pilot for Alaska Airlines. My daughter's a scientist down lower 48. When COVID hit, I decided to run for mayor. That was a big challenge. Came in the middle of COVID, opened up the city, got us off all of the masking and mandatory vaccines for municipal employees. We didn't go there, and we opened up the city. That was a big challenge. Got a lot of resistance from the assembly. We're not on the same side of the political spectrum at all, and that's fine. Not bad people, but they just don't see the world the way I do. I'm more of a data-driven person, and they weren't. So, we did some great things. We got the port project back on track, and then we saved the Sullivan Arena for sporting and outdoor events, and in fact, we just had our first sportsman's convention there again here last week. That was real exciting. Spent a lot of time there, and it felt like old home week coming back to that venue for that. The assembly did want to tear the building down and put in high density, low income housing. I thought that shouldn't happen. So, anyways, got into the governor's race. I think I have a lot to offer. I'm the only candidate on our side with large scale political executive experience. As a mayor, it's about our government's a little less than half the size of the state government. So I thought I've got the experience to run, and I think as a center right kind of guy, I look at things. I think from a data perspective, solve the problems, keep a lot of the radicalism out of politics. And so as I got into this race, we got hit by this freight train called trawl, bycatch, the whole group of issues there. And so I had to get up to speed very quickly. My campaign manager happened to know David. He says, "You got to talk." Several months ago, Dave and I started talking, and I came to the realization he's not a radical. He's very data driven. When he gives you numbers, it's not a bunch of opinions. He'll send you NOAA data to back up what he says. And government, that's what you want. Is you want people that are not emotional. You want people that can advise you, that are, again, data driven. It fit really well with me over the months, probably the last 3 or 4 months. David, uh, you came to help out and help write my policy and inform me. I've spent a lot of time throughout this campaign, I think more time on this issue than any other issue. And people say, why? There's economic issues, and there certainly are, but those are kind of known solutions for me. This was brand new to me. Shame on me for not knowing it, maybe. I always did have a problem with bycatch, but how big the trawl issue was in that, I was not informed. Now I think I am. I spent an hour on the phone with the state biologist yesterday, learned a lot. And then last week, I spent about 40 minutes talking to a retired fish biologist out of Kodiak, and I even got more informed. I love learning, and this is a learning process. This trawl and bycatch issue. So here we are, and I've said publicly I won't take money from the trawl industry, because I think their voice is strong enough in this area, in this space. And I think the sports fishermen and subsistence fishermen, to include the say the South Shore set netters on Cook Inlet, they're not being hurt. Certainly, in fact, I would say they're being ignored because we see over time that everyone seems to be listening to the money, which seems to be the trawl industry. And the sport fishermen, ironically, who bring in more money than a lot of the fisheries do, they're being ignored. So I think it's time to listen to the sport fishermen, and the some of the set netters on Cook Inlet. And of course, the state is big, and the fisheries aren't all the same. Inlet is different than Bristol, is different than Bering Sea, and different than Southeast. I think there's about 52 different official fisheries in the state and being managed by state, local, federal agencies, international groups. It's a mess, but
Yeah.
that doesn't mean we don't challenge it and move forward, because at the end of the day, our job is to manage according to Article 8 and manage for the max benefit of all Alaskans. And my job will be, certainly as governor, is we maintain the fishery, we grow the fishery. And people, I got in a little bit of I was at Swampsea here last week, Southwest Alaska Municipal Council, and a lot of trawlers there, draggers and others, and they said, "Hey, you're not following the science if you talk about banning trawling." And I says, "Well, let's talk about science for a sec, because that's kind of where I come from." And I says, "Have we been?" And this was a leading politician in the state, and she said, "You got to follow the science. You're all wrong." And I says, "Well, do we follow this?" She said, "Yes, we've been following it for 50 years." And I says, "You just answered the question. We've been following it for 50 years." And I said, "Where's the fish? Where are the kings?" And they immediately make a jump from the biological argument to the economic argument. As soon as they lose that argument, they pivot. Well, if you shut down trawling, you're going to kill this town, that town, this town. And I go, "Wait a sec, I'm still back here talking about fish biology, fish management. And all of a sudden, you're talking about economic." So they've lost the argument when they say
Mm.
follow the science. And I've spoken to three scientists in the last 2 weeks. One is an employee of NPFMC. Two others are from the state, and I will never mention their name, and I don't have their permission. I won't even allude to who they are, but they are experts. And they say, one even said this: "The science is bad. If we keep following the science as we have been, we will have a complete crash." That's not even a paraphrase. So, the it and they say that if you mention, within the space of NPFMC, if you mention reducing pollock catch, you will be threatened. So, when people threaten you for speaking what you think is the truth, then you probably know you're speaking the truth, and somebody doesn't want you to. So that's where I'm at. You connect all these dots, even though the science is bad, and I would love to lean heavily, completely on the science. When I have scientists who are employed in this field, in this space, and they tell you the science is bad and we're being threatened if we say anything, I connect all the dots. Each anecdote, each situation is a dot. You connect them, and then you see where we're going, and it's not a good place we're going to. It just isn't. So how we're going to solve this? We've been tweaking here, tweaking there. We've been cutting back on sport fish. We've been cutting back here. We've been pushing all the little buttons. It's not working. Now we got to go in and push the really big buttons. And you got to start at the top. Out of state commercial trawlers. One, they got to keep their nets off the bottom. And two, I'm going to get in trouble here, but they got to go away. And you start at the top, and you influence every level that you can, and you have to start there, because we're crashing. We're just crashing. And what's going on in the Yukon is different than the Kuskokwim, is certainly different than Cook Inlet, as we refer to Kings. We're deep into failure mode, and someone's got to stand up and reverse this. Now, jurisdictionally, I would fight for greater jurisdiction. I would like what Texas has, which is 11 miles. I was told about an hour ago by a legislator that Louisiana just went out to 9 miles and claimed it. They didn't go to the federal government. They says, "We now claim 9 miles." Well, if I could get to 10 or 11 miles, especially in heavily island areas like Prince William, where I do most of my fishing, you've then captured the whole geographic area, because every island is basically got a 22-mile diameter around it. Well, we're going a long ways to solving the problem in Prince William. Bristol, a big open Bristol, Bering Sea, those are different things and different solutions, you know. So jurisdictionally, I think we've got some pretty big buttons to push there, but the little stuff isn't working. So with that, that's my opener. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all, for
Well,
all of that and for reaching out to the scientists employed, because that was an area where I felt like was underserved. So that is obviously fulfilling a curiosity there and confirmation of what you're hearing. So that's awesome.
yeah, and thanks to, and by the way, to David for getting me started in all this and educating me along the way. I just noticed your note here from your trip, your summary of your trip to DC last week. So good on you for all that. Hopefully something comes of that. We get some federal legislation. Hopefully that will give us some relief.
Yeah, well, maybe I should apologize for dragging you into it.
No,
Somebody
it's
had to
good.
do it. Yeah, and I think, I mean, to follow up on your point, one of the things that has kept when I first started to interact with this, the only thing I had access to were the NOAA bycatch reports, and they say whatever. This week it said 1,000 kings were dumped, 100 tons of halibut. And obviously that's bad. But the thing that's really kept me going has been this leaks or reports or whatever from biologists or former trawlers or politicians that have dealt with it or law enforcement either saying, David, you got to look at this. I mean, you think these fish numbers are bad. Like, look at, I don't like to say the corruption side of it, but people are being intimidated for speaking out against it,
Yes,
which
they are.
it just interferes with the rule of government, and society. And that's the thing that really twists the knife in me and I guess keeps me going is that, and I think the same for you, is that ethically it's just not right where we're at. You talked about not taking money from Trawl. Do you get the impression that Trawl is like shopping for a governor candidate to fall behind, or have you gotten feedback on that?
Yeah, they found a couple. They've found a couple that I know of. I don't need to mention names. I like the guys. That's not the point. You'll figure that out. You, David, I think you know who they are. I'm not mentioning names here. I don't do that. I just try to get to solutions without calling out people, other than to give them, say, credit for doing great things. But yeah, it's an incredibly difficult environment, and we have to come back to Article 8 because, and this is what I found out, NPFMC, the people I work for it, the members, they don't take an oath like a politician does to the Constitution. Therefore, in this instance, Article 8, they take a different oath when they're sworn into that office, and the the staff that works for them, they go, the Constitution, I didn't know this until last week. The Constitution is not their guiding light. They have, that's a federal body. So that was informative because they say that as a mechanism of defense. They say people are attacking us on say board or staff of the board or advisors to the board. Well, they're governed by a different set of principles, and that's the sad thing because I believe the fish that are in our area are our fish. They're Alaskans' fish, and again, as a oath taking politician, my job is to protect Alaskans, and we're not a colony anymore. I mean, it just seems like Washington, California, Oregon, they seem to think that this is 100 years ago, and they just come up since they're closest, and we're the colony. And then you got these extreme environmentalists and say we don't want to develop anything in Alaska. It's like, well, I'm not your park either. I'm not your colony. I'm not your park. I want the same rights that every other state has to manage their resources, manage their land. And we've only got 730,000 people in this state, and we've got a lot of acres. I think it's about 2.5 to 5 acres per person. I think something. It might even be square miles, to be honest with you. We've got so few people and so much land. We want to develop just a little bit of it, a little bit. If we could get to 2%, because we have 1% is privately owned, if we could just get to 2%, we'd be well on our way to success without impacting any of our negatively our natural resources. And in the management, we want to manage our fish. We want to manage all the land within the state. And I think what I'm reading now, and you'd know more, Dave, but the federal government is now looking at allowing us, just as of last week, this administration allowing us to manage federal land, fish and game on federal lands within the state. I hope that comes true. I'll stand by to be educated on that. But that's what we need. We need more of that.
Sure.
Well, you did preface David's trip back east a minute ago. I don't know if he's going to taboo that subject or if he's going to tell us that he's been big globetrotting and trying to help.
Yeah. So Dan Sullivan had put out a couple months ago a bill aimed at trawl and bycatch, and a lot of it was about studying, trying to determine if midwater nets were on bottom. That seemed to be like the problem statement and the question of like, oh my God, how can we figure out if these nets are on bottom? And I wrote a pretty long letter to him saying, that's not really the problem. The NPFMC has already told us the midwater nets are on the bottom 40 to 100% of the time. So we need to acknowledge that. And if that's the case, then we regulate them like bottom trawl are. But as we do that, we also have to look at forage fish and like bycatch limits that need to float up and down with abundance and unobserved bycatch. Anyway, so seemed pretty well received. He invited me to go meet with him in DC, and I've talked with his fisheries teams a couple times since then, and I think they're pretty open to revising that bill or putting out another one, which in the big scheme of the last 6 years of this group and our interaction with DC has been a big deal. So, and I
Right.
think that really aligns with what Dave has put out. Dave had done that video at the start of taking this on that essentially hit those same points.
Right. Right. Well, we came up with and I mean literally we came up with a 6-point plan. Actually, it's a 7-point plan, and it's on our social media on what we're going to do. And it's simple things like pollock needs to be regulated as a forage fish. It's that which, for your public, probably maybe they don't know. That's a fish that basically converts, krill, phytoplankton, zooplankton into fish food. So they're the bottom, essentially almost the bottom of the food chain. And you've got to do that. We got to prohibit the gear from hitting the bottom. That's just has to be done and enforced. And we can do that. People say, well, the SpaceX folks have come in and Bob has told us this, that they've told him we have the ability to put these sensors on a net and transmitting through satellite. Well, guess what? I've been watching a lot of trawl videos put out by the industry over the last few weekends, and the captains always know exactly where their nets are. If their net is on the bottom, they know it because the tensioners within the net communicate a signal up to the boat. So I'm just thinking about how to relay that data, which is just compel them statutorily to convey all that information to a state government agency. And so we can monitor them in real time. So if they're not on the bottom, we can see that. We can call up any net at any time and ping them and find out where are your nets, and then create a fine structure, a penalty structure. If your net is on the bottom, maybe it's a $10,000 or $100,000 penalty for every time you touch the bottom. We can geofence these nets. We know exactly where they are because the captains know where they are. It's just that we don't have access to that data, and if we have to, we can compel that. I know it's proprietary information as well, but the government always has access to most proprietary information. And when we do that, it's quite possible. We also have to account for unobserved bycatch. I think your listeners know what that is. We got to close the halibut nurseries and establish real chum limits because the chum out west especially is a real problem. Chum in Prince William is not so much a problem. And then our bycatch limits need to be adjusted, I think. So if there's fewer fish going up the river, the lower the bycatch limits, even as we're trying to get rid of the trawl component of bycatch. Then, of course, the big one, I think number 7 is that we've added, which makes so much sense. We kind of glossed over it, Dave, was of the 6 nominations, we need to put sport fishing people 3 each on each one of those positions, and hopefully the secretary will approve the first one or the second or the third. But the the trawl industry um, is grossly overrepresented on that. And of course, I have a problem with why do we have lower 48 people managing Alaska fisheries in the first? I want an Alaskan on the fisheries board in the Gulf of Mexico. How about that? That's about how
Yeah.
you know If you what do you mean? There's an Alaskan Fish and Game, um, a commissioner on a fishing in the lower 48? They don't allow that, but the crap always seems to flow north, and I think we gotta be done with that.
Sure, I think, and for people that don't have much familiarity with that, the NPFMC that regulates this has two levels. The council up top is 11 people, and then the advisory panel is about 18. But on both of those, almost 50% are made up of non-Alaskans, Oregon and Washington reps. But the NPFMC never regulates a fishery offshore of Washington and Oregon. They have their own council called the Fisheries Management Council, which, to Dave's point, has no Alaskan reps on it, because why would it? It's not regulating Alaskan fisheries. So if you follow the history of Magnuson-Stevens Act and Ted Stevens trying to get this passed and needing support of Oregon and Washington, then 20, 30 years ago, that made sense politically. But now when the rubber's hitting the road and we're low on fish, the way those Oregon and Washington reps make money off of Alaska fisheries is by reducing regulation on their own trawl boats. So
Yep.
it's just real, real predictable what would happen if we're in this scenario. But here we are, and a lot of it's because the governor has never stood up and said, we're going to do this, or we're going to take it back by, not by force, but legally by force, or lawsuits or whatever it takes.
Right. Yeah, and Congress needs to step in. It really, again, it comes back, you gotta, in politics, think in concepts and big pictures, and it doesn't matter if it's our game and our management of our navigable waterways, and our game and our fish. Why is anybody who is not in Alaska have anything to say about what we do in this state? That's we're not, again, I come back to the big concept. We're not a colony and we're not your park. If you don't get a PFD, if you're not here shoveling snow in the winter at 10 below, please come in the summer, leave all your money, and then just kindly butt out, because you come up here, we entertain you, you leave your money. That's a pretty good transaction. But don't come up here all year round and tell us what to do. And and that's the concept I'm trying to navigate from.
I think you say at one point you'd looked into the Grand Banks cod fishery. Had you read that book? I think it's named cod.
Yep, it is. Yeah, I was told early on, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago to get the books. I like studying again, so I read the book, and this goes back several hundred years. It starts with the Portuguese in Newfoundland. So and then as we make this big arc, that's the funny thing is we fished out the North Sea because the Brits needed their fish and chips. And and then that got low. Then they go to Iceland. They fish out Iceland and over the centuries, and then they go to Newfoundland. Then they go to off the banks of Massachusetts, so the Grand Banks, and they fish them out. Oh, and then when they in the 90s when they ended those fisheries statutorily, they kind of take sometimes the same ships, they bring them around to the West Coast and they work up the West Coast, from the American River up through Willamette, the Columbia, the Snake. It's like you can't see what's coming. There's a playbook here, and they will fish until there's no more fish because they fish. That's what they do. They make money off of fishing, and people need to make money. I'm a strident capitalist, but then government needs to step in and protect the resource so that 50 or 100 years from now we can catch fish. And I really don't care if the Japanese or the Chinese have fish sticks at McDonald's. That's not my concern. And in fact, I'm not concerned if lower 48 people are eating fish sticks in a fast food restaurant. My job is to make sure, first and foremost, subsistence and sport and Alaska owned commercial fishermen can continue to make a living as they have and as their parents have and grandparents. I had a talk with a captain of a 58-foot boat in Area M, and great guy. He's been doing it for 35 years. And he says, I've been doing it the same way. He believes it's very sustainable, but he says, yeah, we drag the bottom. And so I talked to a retired biologist from the North Pacific, a state employee, retired. And, he's not against trawling, but he says the trawlers need to clean up their act because definitely those nets can't be on the bottom anymore at all.
Mhm.
So, I mean, so this guy isn't a hard band trawl guy, but he says the trawl guys are creating a big problem by just simply dragging the bottom. Boy, if I say this on the campaign trail, if we did to our forests what we're doing to the bottom of the ocean, everybody, we would never do it. Uh,
But you hear trawlers argue that the areas that they are dragging, especially in smaller boat dragging in the state waters, I believe, that they're fishing sandy bottoms and areas that they're not destroying, like, and that they're going back to the same areas year after year. So can you help us prove that point wrong?
Well, and Dave, we can let you answer the question, but a big part of this is that, like people look at the mud in the Bering Sea and they say, from a human perspective, they look at that and they say, oh, that's nothing. It's just mud and a little bit of seagrass. But that's the main habitat in the most bountiful ocean ecosystem in the entire world. Whatever's in that mud that's been settling for umpteen million years is perfect. And it was perfect until it got drugged. And they also, back to Melissa's point, when they say, oh, we fish the same spot year after year, the ocean's not built equally. There's seamounts and ledges and stuff where all the fish congregate. And yeah, that's where they only fish, but that's the most productive part of the entire ecosystem.
well, too, and when you fish for halibut, the irony is when I'm fishing for halibut, say off Perry Island, north of Perry Island, there's a slot there where it's pretty productive for halibut for guys who are better than me. And but I'm looking for flat bottom. I'm looking real hard for flat bottom on my fish finder. And I got to stay kind of less than 350 feet because I don't have an electric reel. But I mean, you're looking for the mud bottom. Well, if a mud bottom is a barren wasteland, why are the halibut there? And you look at Cook Inlet. Cook Inlet is a silt. The entire Cook Inlet until you get way past Seldovia, uh, it's pretty much a silt or small gravel bottom. And so why is dragging a sand or silty bottom okay? And makes no biologic sense to me at all. And this is the thing that's funny. It's another anecdote. And, again, back to following the science, you just keep asking, why are you doing this? And where's the science on this? And they said, we only know one thing. We wish we had data, wish we'd spend more money. And I get this from the professionals as well as the politicians. And they say, but we only know one thing. Trawling doesn't impact king salmon. I go, well, how is that the only thing that you're absolutely certain about? That makes no sense to me. You couldn't have spent some of the money yet you used to determine that to go study if it is water temperature, if it is something else, if we've got invasive species. But no, one thing. Right there, that's another little anecdote that communicates to tell me that there's an agenda here. We don't know anything, but we know it's not bycatch, or we know it's not trawling. That's the problem. And if you stop trawling, you're going to kill this town, this town, this town. Something's not right here. And you talk to the scientists, and they says, "Boy, we wish we had more money to study these things." But they're going, "We don't know." I just had a long talk yesterday with a guy about pike control in the valley here. I mean, it was a little over an hour about pike control, Alexander Lakes, those areas. And they're looking at, cleaning out the pike for netting them to make way for kings. But I mean, the kings are still in the Alexander River, for example. I know that. They're just not fishable because there's not enough of them. And the kings stay in the river, and the pike pretty much not universally stay in the lake. So we're going to wipe out a very good sport fishery in the valley for the hope that someday we might get kings back. But they said, well, we don't know. And they said, we're now finding pike from the valley, upper Cook Inlet. We're finding it down on the Kenai Peninsula. He says they come down the river, migrate across through salt water, and go into the streams in the northern peninsula. And I go, well, at least you know. I just want my kids to have what I've had in the last 35 years, which is to catch kings and shoot a moose. And I'm just telling you, we're in the wrong direction on all those things.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a pretty good point. So there's a big troll claim is that their king bycatch or their king bycatch of Alaskan kings is statistically insignificant. Say maybe it's only 1,000 that we're going to head for the Kenai River, 10,000 that were going to go for the Yukon or whatever it may be. But if you compare that, imagine you or I on a year that the Kenai River was closed down to keeping kings, we went and we whacked 1,000 kings out of the river and threw them up on the riverbank and didn't eat them. I mean, they'd call for the death penalty on us. I mean, that's what happens to a common Alaskan in this scenario. And if we made the claim that that was statistically insignificant, they'd take our head off. But the trawl does it, and so when those regulations start to not add up, you say, well, why isn't the NPFMC overseeing this in a different way or calling them out or saying maybe it is significant? But the real answer to that is that the NPFMC itself has huge trawl interest on it.
Again, and they threaten they'll even threaten your livelihood.
Hmm.
I'm not saying these are mafiosos or anything. I'm not saying that at all, but I talked to a shop owner, store owner on the Kenai Peninsula about 8 or 9 days ago. And he says, I'm in my store. And he says, these two reps from the trawl industry came in. He says, they walked right into my office, says, hey, we hear you're bad mouthing trawling. And he says the audacity, the boldness that they had to walk into my store, then into my office and tell me I was wrong. And I've been living on the peninsula all of my life, earning money off of the fisheries. And I've got two guys from the lower 48 coming in. That there's something wrong there.
Yeah.
And again, it's who's catching the fish. If as we wind this down, we got to start with the non-Alaskan owned companies that make their money up here and they don't leave us anything. I think I read an old editorial by you, Dave, and it says, they get the fish that 76% of the money, I think you said, from the pollock fisheries goes to lower 48. So they get the money and we're left holding the bag with no money in it.
For sure. Well, and that's been, like back to your story about that cod book, is that's to them, the miracle of this factory trawler model is you have a floating city and the boat doesn't care where it fishes. Essentially, they got to fish where there is fish, but the crew is flying in from somewhere else. So if that boat ended up in Panama, Nicaragua, the Arctic someday, the Antarctic someday, as long as there's fish for them to catch, they don't have this personal attachment to it. But for Alaskans, if we ruin our backyard, it's just like the Grand Banks East Coast cod crash. 30 years later, they're still stuck cleaning up the mess, but the factory trawlers left a long time ago. Some of them
Yeah,
came to
yeah.
Alaska and they're in the Bering
Yeah,
Sea.
they're in Dutch Harbor.
Yeah, yeah, but with the same ownership. That's just insane.
At Swampsea, I was talking to this former elected official from Unalaska who loves the trawl industry. All fine. That person doesn't live in Alaska anymore, but he or she was here for the event and really loves the trawl industry. And they say, if you shut down trawling, you're going to kill Unalaska because they're the ones that keep the processors going all year long. So when we have crabs and we have other things, there's a processor there. And I says, did you listen to yourself? Because we're talking about factory trawlers. Factory trawlers don't use onshore factories. They come in, and I've been, like I say, watching these videos on YouTube. The fish comes in the back and basically metaphorically, it works its way through the bowels of the ship and it winds up in frozen boxes up at the front of the ship. Then they get to Dutch and they put it on an airplane and it flies away. Where in any of that are we using onshore factories, which means possibly Alaskans making money? And then you watch these videos of these factory trawls and it's put on by the trawlers. It's fine. You watch them and they go around, they introduce like the head mechanic is this and the captain is here and he's giving, where are you from? And I don't think they're failing at their PR. Not one was an Alaskan. In
Mhm.
the whole hour and 15-minute, I think, video, not one was Alaskan. The captain, I think, was from Norway. The floor manager, the processing manager, was from the lower 48 Midwest, I believe. The head of maintenance was from, I think, Nigeria. Um, it's like, where are the Alaskans? I'd be happy with them, Americans, but there's no Alaskans. So you tell me how Alaska makes money off of lower 48 factory trawlers.
Mhm.
A little bit of fuel,
Fuel.
maybe.
Yeah, where does the fuel come from?
Doesn't it get taken out by small boats out to them?
Yeah, but the fuel comes from the lower
The
48.
origination. I see.
Yeah, yeah. I was raised as in college as an economist, and so you always think of things in as a thread. Where does something begin and where does it end? And so I'm gonna ask you, okay, they're buying fuel. So if you're a fuel retailer to a ship and you're making a few cents. You're not the wholesaler, you're the retailer. Your margin is probably less than 3 or 4%. So where does the rest of that money go? And it goes to the refiners in California, Texas, whatever.
We're taking massive risks to benefit people and corporations out of state, which just doesn't pencil out. Alaska leadership shouldn't let it pencil out, I don't think.
Correct. And David, I'll let you answer the question. I know you know it because, well, I got it from you. But how much money does sport fishing bring into the state of Alaska?
Yeah, it's been a while since I looked at that. I think it's
I was just putting together a slide that it's 1.7 billion.
oh,
So you divide that over 730,000 some people. I think that is a lot. And again, politicians are required by the Constitution to advance the interests and protect the interests of Alaska's citizens. And we keep losing track of things, and we keep just getting distracted on these other objectives. The trawl bycatch people, they're not in my cross check. The If you're an Alaskan, you're definitely in deep into my cross check, and I got to ask what's good for you on any given day and fight for that. And we are also compelled to fight for future generations as far as management of our resources. So I'm desperately waiting for a grandkid. And so I think what's going to happen to him or her? Are they going to be able to even catch a silver? It seems like the Reds are okay. And that's another story on the science of it. Last year, I think they predicted 4.3 million Reds in the Kenai, and they came back with like 11.5 million. Well, I'm glad they were wrong in that direction, but that goes to show what quality of science are we dealing with? If you're off by a factor of 2.5, we got a problem. So
well, and
I don't
especially if you
know.
look at the history of the world. I mean, that's the other big thing looming at the end of this is that no trawl fishery in the history of the world has been able to extract at this rate for more than about 50 years. And that's kind of what we're coming up to. And we're seeing pollock numbers do pretty well, though they said the survey was down 30% this year.
Yeah, I saw that.
Pollock tends to do this, but if it goes down another 30% next year, I mean, that's constitutes a crash. And then all of a sudden, that's what everything else eats. So that chain reaction can happen real.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess follow the science, but let's follow some better science.
Mhm.
So that's why we got to do, again, back to the big button issue. We hit the big button and stop trawling for, I don't know, 5 years and see what happens. And you go, well, you'll destroy these lower 48 companies. I go, they'll be down in Argentina in 2 months fishing. They can take care of themselves. They're big boys and girls. But what about the small commercial set netters on the south shore of Cook Inlet? What about them? What about the small family drift netters in Cook Inlet? What about them? They've been shut down for what, 3 years now? I mean, we need to get the South Shore set netters back in business because they add to the betterment of Alaska citizens as much as sport fishing does. So yeah, we've been screwing this up for a long time. And now we're running out of resources. And it's a very typical come in over harvest. It could be lumber, it could be mining, strip mining, it could be fishing, it could be wildlife. They all follow the same pattern. And it's I'm a small government guy, I really am, but I'm not a no government guy. And it's time for government in this instance to step in and take control and management is by using better scientific methods and data.
Yeah, and I think the biggest, scariest red flag of this is when we're essentially, whether it's procedurally or outright, being forbidden from asking these questions at the NPFMC or up higher than that. This theory of like you would be thrown out of fisheries politics for life if you said that pollock, which are obviously a forage fish, be classified that. I mean, that's crazy. Or if you say that these midwater nets, if you push to have them classified as bottom trawls because they're on bottom, or if that's considered a risky position, then that paints a hell of a picture, and that's not a good one. A couple years ago, I'd connected with one of the eco writers for the New York Times, and she was trying to find somebody who had worked on the trawl boats to give a personal testimonial about it. And I had this person in mind that I've been talking to, and kind of came down to the last day of, hey, are we going to talk? And he said, I think they'll kill me or my sons if I do this interview with the New York Times, and that is, I mean, that's big and bad. That's something that Alaska doesn't need, and not a rain cloud we should be living under.
No, no, and the ability to speak truth to power, that's the essence of media. That's kinda, Melissa, what you're doing here is you're speaking through this venue, speaking truth to power, and you should not be threatened. And again, I opened, 40 minutes ago or with a statement that we've got people that are working for NPFMC and people whose W-2 is paid for by the state of Alaska, or the NPFMC and another federal agency. And they say, again, quote, anyone talks about reducing pollock fishery, you are threatened. And that means you're threatened with your job. No one said anything about physical threats. But that's why maybe a great big open discussion where we bring in, say, retired fish biologists and say, hey, no jeopardy, open media, open forum. And we say, have you ever been threatened? Should pollock take be reduced? If so, how much? How often do you think the nets are on the bottom? Should we enforce nets being on the bottom? That is, like we talked about, using the technology to severely fine for having your nets on the bottom. If you're a pelagic, that means mid column. If you're pelagic, what are you doing on the bottom in the first place? And David, you sent me something. You go, they've got people that got 350-foot nets in 200 feet of water. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's all legal. I mean, that's the other big problem with it. I was thinking earlier today, so my sister had kind of three kids back to back. So she had toddlers and little kids in the house for 10 years straight. She at one point told me, I've figured out that if any of these kids is unhappy, it's always one of two things. It's either that they're hungry or they're tired. It's not that their clothes feel wrong. It's not that they're upset about school, whatever else. I always address these two first because that's what it usually is. And just like that, if anytime there's a fisheries or management issue, it comes down to, is there enough food and is there enough habitat to support them? And so that comes into, well, are these midwater nets on bottom wrecking habitat? And are we taking out too many pollock that everything else depends on? Those are just so intuitive to look at first. And the idea that people are being, whatever, hated upon or restricted from looking at it or asking that question just devastates common fisheries management and really points out how big of a hole we're in now.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I'll come full circle to what the scientists, so if we keep following the science as we've had, we are going to collapse.
Hmm.
The pollock fishery is going to collapse. At 3 billion pounds a year, it's going to collapse, at least in the Bering Sea. The salmon will continue to collapse a bit. That's going to collapse. And again, I come back to the issues of why are sport fishermen penalized and go to 1 to maybe 0 halibut? Looks like we're going to hold that 2 for a bit. But the commercial fishermen, the trawlers, their bycatch, confirm if I'm wrong, the bycatch from these trawlers is bigger than the entire sport take. Is that right, Dave?
It is. So there's two ways to look at it. One is by pounds, where it's about 2.5 times as many pounds as like sport and charter take. But then if you look at it as individuals, it's more than the entire state fleet takes. So the longliners, subsistence, charter, everybody all put together takes less individual fish in Alaska than what trawl is pumping. So, and they also make this claim that about 50% of the halibut they release from a trawl net survive. So if we see like last year, I think they said there was 4.2 million pounds of halibut mortality. So halibut that came up and they thought died. What that really means is about 8.4 million pounds came up, hit the deck, they frisbeed them over, and they kind of gave this generous assumption that half of them lived. But if you don't buy into that, then the dynamic or this differential between what's being wasted and what's being caught is massive, kind of double.
Yeah, and the fact that these halibut they're catching are on average 5 pounds means they haven't spawned at all. And every other halibut user group, these fish have spawned at least once, right? I
Yeah.
mean, probably more, but at least once.
Well, and like they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and maybe a video is worth a million. But I watch these trawling videos, these little mini documentaries, and I see a net that is just massive. And I thought they were saying one take would be like 20,000 pounds, one haul, roughly. And
200,000 pounds.
maybe that was it. And of course, they want to have the bigger pollock. But I'm going, if there's a halibut anywhere in that massive ball of fish. And the halibut is, I think the average is 4.76 pounds. And these pollock are 2 or 3 pounds. If there's a halibut he's crushed. He suffocates because he's not in water. That's what happens. And he's drowning in oxygen. And so if you take 5 minutes, and I was watching the timing on these nets, um, I don't think there's any halibut that survive, because by the time they sort them, it's like 10, 15 minutes. Maybe I'm wrong on watching the video, but a halibut can't be on the deck for 10 or 15 minutes and hope to live. No fish
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes on the charter boat, we'll get in a tangle, when you bring up two halibut that are in 10 lines, and it takes a second before you can get the halibut released. But even 3 or 4 minutes sitting on deck while we deal with that halibut isn't taken off like the other ones do. So, but yeah, those boats will tow kind of 3 to 5 hours at a time. So if it got caught at the start, it's been in this net smashed with everything else, potentially 4 or 5 hours. And then just the process of hauling the net onto the boat takes 15, 20 minutes. And then they say through this halibut deck sorting program that they have an additional 30 minutes to go through and release the halibut. So you've got a halibut that could have been in the net 5, 6 hours, with 40 minutes of it out of the water. And we're saying that 50% of them survive. It's just insanity, and it would never fly in another fishery. But here again, it's like, why doesn't the NPFMC hammer this out? Why don't they ask tougher questions? And the answer is, well, the NPFMC is trawl too, so it's crazy.
We're going to have to make some. We're going to have to make some big decisions as a state government coming up. Deeply unpopular decisions amongst some people, but the good thing is the Constitution gives us the guidance that we're compelled by law to support, and that's what's best for Alaskans. And we don't consider the other stuff, and we got to get back to that and leave the political money on the side. We don't care about that. We do what's right for the Alaskan people, because that's who comes for the Alaskan people come before the fish do. But the fish are good for the people of Alaska, so it's very, very synergistic, and we're breaking this. So, anyways, that's kind of long and the short of it for me.
Your 7-point plan, Dave, these are things that feel that you have full control over as governor?
Well, regulating pollock as a forage fish, and I would defer to David. I'm sure the federal government has, because it's a jurisdictional issue, they'll say you can do whatever you want in the 3-mile limit. Well, but you come into federal land, in federal waters, we don't have much of a say over it, but you've got to start. And so that means you've got to appoint sport fishermen and subsistence fishermen to the NPFMC. You got to nominate to appoint. And that's the starting point. So, because if you don't have the right people in place, nothing's going to get better. And people who
I think the move is there, Melissa, so there's 11 voting people on the NPFMC. The Alaska governor chooses 6 of them. And theoretically, if the commissioner of Fish and Game put this proposal forward that said, hey, pollock is a forage fish, you do the deliberations in the NPFMC, the Alaska people, if they all want to vote, all 6 of them, and say that this is the way it is, then it kicks it up the chain. You couldn't make a final decision on it, but compared to what's happening now, I mean, that's the first step that Dave's talking about that has to happen. Then the wheels of the federal government turn, which is good. I mean, maybe we shouldn't say that they're a forage fish tomorrow if the data says otherwise, but the conversation should absolutely be happening, and people shouldn't be intimidated away from having it in the first place. So
Yeah.
that's the governor can put forward those 6 or 7 ideas through this majority on the NPFMC. The NPFMC votes, it goes up to Secretary of Commerce, federal lawmaking, and we see what happens. But if we don't get it done on this first stage, then the conversation never even begins.
What's the timeline for reappointing all those seats that are up and coming? So there's like 2 this year. What is it?
Every term on the NPFMC is 3 years, so I don't know what cycle.
Yeah, I wonder how long it would take our new governor to replace what we got, and so what our timeline is on that. And then also, I'm
That's
concerned about being met with resistance by the Secretary of Commerce with your
it's a legitimate
appointees, because
concern.
that's probably your biggest issue there. So, don't you need help from our federal representatives to make that happen?
Yeah. So this is not just a fisheries issue. This is a political challenge, and it has to be a political solution, which means it's going to take time. Sadly, I think we're actually quite quickly running out of time. That's the frustrating. But then that does create an urgency. It creates a pressure, basically in our favor, to get things done more more quickly. But yeah, there are vested interests. The Secretary of Commerce, he's focused on things like balance of trade and GDP, and he says, "You're going to do what? So a bunch of people can catch sport fish one at a time?" I go, "Yeah, yeah, that's kind of what I'm talking about here." And he said, "And you're going to do that by eliminating factory out of state large factory trawling." Kind of, yeah, that's what I want to do. But Howard Lutnick, he's going to be there at least for 3 more years. Um, and he seems to be a very smart, reasonable guy, and that's the best you can hope for is approach a smart, reasonable person, say, "This is what's going on long term." And this administration federally seems to think very much in the long term interests of what's good for Alaska, because what's good for Alaska, and I believe this wholeheartedly, is good for America. And I think because I do care a bit that people in the lower 48 get to eat Alaska fish. I don't care if everyone else in the world eats Alaskan fish unless there's an excess, and then we'll sell some to them. But we've got onshore processing plants that are owned completely by foreign countries. There's one I know of. It's owned by all the product goes to Japan. And they're an ally of ours. And I go, Okay, why? I mean, it should, so it's a priority of needs. It's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs here. You got to satisfy the basic points, then you work. And if there's fish left over for beyond what the 50 states need, that's fine. That's fine. I can live with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a huge recurring vein is that, I mean, this whole bycatch movement has really been led by commercial fishermen. So there's this whistleblower component of we realize that we catch fish, we kill fish, that's how we make our money. But there's one bad player in the room that has to be cleaned up to save the industry, ironically. But I think there's definitely this vibe of we want Alaskans to have the fish they need first, and then hell yeah, we'll sell all the excess, but not if it leaves our own freezers empty.
Right. Right. And I get this from, you're gonna laugh, from Fairbanks to Ketchikan. So you go in, you give a speech, 4, 5, 6 minutes, and you say, "Do you got any questions?" First question is always this: "What are you gonna do about trawl?" And I go, "You're in Fairbanks. What do you care about trawl?" And they
Mm.
say, "Well, we always go down and fish in Valdez."
Valdez, yeah.
And then the people who are downriver ways, they say the Alaska natives are saying, "We don't, our fish camps are shut down." You talk to Julie Sullivan, oh my goodness, she's focused on that. She says, "I don't think my kids will ever know how to run a fish wheel, run a fish camp. We go down there, we go camping, and that's all that's left because we're going to be at 11 years without any fish camp up the Yukon." So that's a real challenge. And everyone in the state is focused on this, and governance job is to give the people what they want. And I think right now, the last poll was 86% of Alaskans want trawling eliminated completely. As a methodology, trawling just, David, you can confirm this, but I think I just read it was either 84 or 86%. The moment you get about 55% in any poll on one issue, you've got a landslide. We're 30 points above that.
I'd seen 74% last year, but there might be a new poll out that I haven't
Yeah,
seen.
I haven't seen a new
Yeah.
one.
It's been
So
it's been going up rapidly.
yeah, and we just got to make sure that we do this smartly, because I think we will be in a driver's seat here pretty quick, and we've got to do this smartly. But save the fishery, stop the trawling, save the fishery, keep your nets off the bottom. The fundamentals have got to be done early, and then I think 11-mile jurisdiction plus. That's gotta be done, because then that will solve pretty much a lot of Southeast and nearly all of the Prince William area. Because again, every island's a 22-mile radius, and you just make it impossible to trawl in those areas.
Well, Southeast is already closed. What and you would then maybe make some exclusions now.
Yeah,
So
that I
Scallop dredging and shrimp trawling still happens in the waters in Southeast.
yeah, they made exceptions for those fisheries, feeling that they were smaller harm and that they were important economics to the state. I mean, personally, I'm trawl free pescatarian, so I only eat fish, and I swore off scallops and shrimp. And if you're telling me I can have them back, I'm all ears, right? So
yeah. Well,
I
I've got
can't.
a little I've got a little 25-foot sea door. I only really go to Prince William. I get to Seward once, and Homer once, maybe once a year, to do halibut fishing. But
Right.
we went out last year. I had 4 days. I did I think 4 sets over 4 days. And we're down to 2 pots. You know how many shrimp I caught in the places I used to catch a lot of shrimp? I caught two, not 2 gallons. I caught
Mm,
two shrimp,
mm.
and I know what I'm doing. So there's also something wrong there, and I'm told that the shrimp trawlers drag the bottom as well. And I
Yeah.
was told that by a shrimp trawler.
Yeah.
So what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Now shrimp
All
pots,
right.
that's a different animal, not a problem. I'm not in the business of wiping out fisheries, but there's methodologies that are, we were very effective at, 160 years ago, we were very effective at killing buffalo. This is kind of that. We got so efficient at, of eliminating a population, that at some point the government's got to step in and say, yeah, we're done with that, and we need to conserve a resource. That's where we're at. It's kind of like 1890, and we're looking at no more buffalo. What's going on? And well, now we need to protect them. Same thing.
Well, Dave, when I heard your idea to go to take territorial jurisdiction out further past 3 miles, are you shooting for 11 or 12? Is that what I heard? 12's the max, right? And then did you say 11? Is that what your goal was?
Well, I use that as example because for several species, Texas has 11. I believe Louisiana, they went out to 9 miles and just took it. Don't quote me on that number. I just got that recently. But why do we not have what everyone else has? Again, we're not a
Right,
colony.
right. Right. And so, is there a counter? Is there another side of that, David, that you would caution? Is there a concern with that 11 mile, 9 mile, whatever it is? Is there any reason why? Is there an argument for not doing that?
Well, I mean, cost could be one, but we're in enough of a crisis now that we'd probably, the other counter argument, which is essentially philosophical, is say we have Dave Bronson's a great governor for the next 4 years and he controls the first 11 miles, with executive order and through Fish and Game. If the next governor shows up and is super pro trawl and they want to make trawl
Mm,
wide open, then it can happen pretty quick. Whereas when things go through the federal process and the NPFMC, it grinds and there is like this guaranteed public comment. Not that it's been working for us, but
yeah,
that's a lingering.
that's
It's like
not any reason to deter the
a
plan,
theoretic.
because that would be more of a quick fix now while
Mm.
you worked on the federal side. All right.
Well, and again, timing, it is my sense that we're kind of running out of time here. The other thing is I think in the world of politics and pressures going back and forth against one another. We see the pressure right at this moment. The reason we're talking is because the pressure is so great on politicians to eliminate all these problematic behaviors, trawling, bycatch, dragging the bottom. a future governor, unless it's 50 years from now, and he or she has we're back to 70s level fisheries in the near future, foreseeable future, there's no governor who's going to come in and be pro trawl, because the same David will get out of his rocking chair and come back and start this all over again. So
How old do you think
you
Dave is?
just I don't see that happening. Because I'll go back to the buffalo. Nobody was advocating for the shooting of buffalo until they got pretty plentiful in parts of South Dakota into the 80s. So I mean that was 100 years before anyone says, maybe we could actually create a sport hunt for buffalo, because there's kind of too many of them in the Black Hills. And I used to live there, so I'm a little bit familiar with this. The political pressure won't be there to do that.
Yeah, and I guess we don't see that. We've seen those Gulf states go in one direction.
No. No. So, and then, but there is the cost, like David said, the cost of enforcement. How many troopers do we have? If you're gonna say do an 8 or 10x increase in the real estate surface area that you have to enforce on, do we have the troopers? Do we have the ships to even do that? I think most people obey the law begrudgingly, but they obey the law. You just tell them they can't do that. There's not a lot of pirates out there that are going to come into state waters and deliberately violate, because from an airplane, you can tell if somebody's dragging, a net, and you can tell if they're trawling where they're not supposed to be trawling. So the enforcement, I think, cost will be fairly minimal.
For sure. Well, hey, we've been, I think you already answered it kind of through the podcast, but we've been doing our last two questions on each episode. The first one is if we found out that like the 7-point plan ended up effectively banning trawl, if that was the outcome, if you would be accepting of that result. And then the second is if you would accept trawl money, which you already talked.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
I hope I got the order right. Again, I'm talking big buttons. Yeah, ban trawling in the near term. Get this situation under control. And I don't. Yeah, I'm not going to take their money. I've said this, a dozen times in the public. I'm not going to take their money, and I've told the trawl leadership. I don't mention names. I shouldn't even be mentioning companies, but I told leadership, and I says, and anyone who takes money from the trawl industry is not going to win this governor's race. I know politics a little bit, and I just think that's not going to happen unless something crazy happens. It's just not going to happen. So they didn't like that news. So, because they've lost their influence. And I told them, I said, hey, the sport and small commercial people, because it's not commercial against sport or sport
Right.
against, is what it is. It's large factory trawling against everyone else. And they tell me
Everyone
that
else.
everywhere. It's like, again, Cook Inlet set netters need to be back in business. Kenai River needs to be full of king salmon, because what you've done is the Kenai Peninsula and the Kenai River, you've taken a 3-month season where people, guides, hardware store, fishing tackle salesmen, and all the other people, you took a 3-month window where they can build, and you shrunk it to 3 weeks, which is essentially the second run of reds. That's everyone is hurting on this. I mean, and thank heavens, just thank heavens the reds are there, because what if they make a mistake? They estimate 5 million next year, and they come up with 1.5 or 4 million, and they make the error in the wrong direction. Then the red fishery, the sockeye is done, and then we've got stores, businesses going out of business. Because I talked to one guy, uh, you know, tackle store place, and he says I make 80% of my revenue for the year in 3 weeks.
I suspect you're talking about good friends and clients of ours that I know well that are in this game with
Well,
us.
again, I don't mention names, good or bad, unless they give me explicit permission to.
Right.
Yeah, because I don't need to throw anyone under the bus. I'm already under there and it's crowded. I'll stay there all alone.
Well, out of the three of us visiting here, you are not the most hated person by trawl as it stands.
That's David.
You're making their list though.
Yeah,
Same initials. You better watch out.
yeah, they'll transpose that and get us in the same net. So, but that is what it is. You run for office, you got to take the barbs. I spent three years taking the barbs from the the media, the hardcore, I'll just say, I know you got a lot of people that are on both sides of the spectrum, but the hard left went after me for 3 years. I never made a point of defending myself. In fact, I made a conscious decision to not do that because once you start defending yourself, then is what they do is they trigger you, they attack you just so you spend all your time defending yourself. And I says, it is what it is. I'll let my actions speak for themselves. And someday I'll defend myself maybe. And in this campaign, I'm now going back and looking at, I created a website called whohatesdave.com. And I says, hey, now you want to attack me? I'll defend myself as my time as mayor. And I explain things from snow removal to homeless to legal fights with the assembly, and they go, "Oh, I didn't know that." And I says, "Yeah, because I didn't tell you deliberately. I didn't tell you why I did this and why I did that and why this did or didn't happen." And but now I get to defend myself, so it's
Ooh, I'll have to go read about the
cool.
snow removal. We still have that
Yeah,
problem.
yeah. We have that problem at about 60 inches of snow, and I had 132 inches. Yeah.
Well, this has been very informative, Dave. I'm super grateful that you're out there talking to all kinds of people, including scientists at the MPFMC and ADFNG level, to get the frontline opinion, and talking to David. Obviously, he's well versed in all of this. So thank you for making it an important issue to you and your campaign.
Yep. And I'm happy to help lead in this. I think that's what you do in campaigns is you create narratives, force issues. Whether you win or lose is not it. You force issues to be brought into the open and spoken about. Hopefully, at the very minimum, I think I'm going to win this race. But even if I don't, at least is what I did is I added to the narrative on something that's absolutely crucial to the people of this state. Uh, and we have dialogue, and like this forum that you're doing is maybe someday we can talk about hunting and why there's no moose in 16B.
Yeah.
That I'd really like to talk about that. And that's what campaigns are for. And
Yeah.
again, I was very appreciative to David for not being a radical. He's very thoughtful, meticulous. His hair's not on fire because on my side of the political spectrum, on the far right, we got everybody's got their hair on fire. It seems like, and I think, and then well, there's the left too. So, they've got more than their fair share of crazy. I just want to stay in the middle somewhere. I'm kind of center right, stay in the middle, fight for what I think is good for this state. And that's all it's about. And win or lose.
All right. Well, Dave, I think you'll make it past the primaries. So maybe you'll come back and talk to us again in the fall.
But yeah, I would love to. You have a great forum here, Melissa, and certainly on both hunting and fishing. Keep up the great work.